Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Changing Tides podcast. In each episode, we invite guests to have honest conversations about their mental health journeys with the goal of destigmatizing mental health within the Asian American Pacific Islander community. Due to the nature of the podcast, we'll be discussing a variety of mental health topics and possibly triggering experiences. While we and the majority of our guests are not trained professionals, we encourage you to practice self-care while listening and seek professional guidance if you or a loved one is in need of support. With that said, let's start the episode.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope everybody's having a nice time. My name is Tsay, and I describe my mental health journey as a anywhere door. And for those who aren't familiar with the word anywhere door, back in the 80s, there was this Japanese TV animation called Doraemon. And in this animation, there's an iconic gadget called the Anywhere Door. Basically, the concept was this door was a portal to anywhere, really. Any space, time, dimension. But I'm getting off track. My name is Tsay, as I said. Some of you may know me, some of you who don't. And for those who don't, earlier this year, I was the hero of Monterey Park.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Changing Tides podcast. My name is Matthew Yonemura, and I am this host for this episode today. Thank you so much for tuning in. We have a really special guest on this episode. This was also a really cool episode recording because this was actually a live event that took place last month at the Terasaki Budokan. In front of a live audience. It was an AAPI event put on by the LA Galaxy and the LA Kings, and they were nice enough to invite me. As a big part, thank you to Ryan Chu Tachikawa, who used to work at LTSC and now works for the LA Kings. So shout out to Ryan for that connection and bringing us in. So, it was a live event mostly for youth. I believe it was mostly middle school and high school age, young adults from the Little Tokyo area, anyone from the LA area who was interested in attending, and a lot of the Mikasa kids attended. And Mikasa is one of the youth programs, after-school programs that LTSC hosts. So it was really cool to do this talk in front of a live audience, and it also presented an interesting approach to the interview where maybe if it were a normal sit-down episode of the CT podcast like we normally do and not in front of this audience, we might have done the episode a little different, largely due to the nature of the conversation and the route it could have gone. But I think because of this setting, it actually led to a really unique discussion that you may not have thought of. So a little content warning, we don't discuss it a whole lot, but this is with the hero from the shooting that took place in Monterey Park during Lunar New Year. So if that event is triggering to you and you would prefer to stay away from this episode or take a step away, please be mindful of that and of your own mental health as you listen to this episode. But again, we don't discuss the event that took place, really. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce the interview that we had at the Budokan in front of a live audience that I had with Tsay. So from there, with Brandon giving that great introduction, I would like to just go ahead and start by getting into this conversation. And you mentioned the Anywhere Door. How does that translate into your mental health journey?
Yeah, so when I started my mental health journey, I was very reluctant to seek any mental health because I always had this preconceived notion that I think most people do. Mental health is expensive, it's a luxury, it's only for people who have severe mental illnesses, but those are rather untrue. And as I talked to my peers and my friends, they really suggested that I would taking mental health would be a positive thing for me. And going through it, it was a real eye-opener because the therapists there were really helpful in the sense of they got me to this Anywhere door and showed me what was inside. There was this beautiful mind space and also chaotic where you would be able to learn new things about yourself that you never thought you would ever have in there. It's a journey where it's not about the destination. You don't have to take something out of every therapy session like, oh, on this session we have to get here. No, the content of therapy is very subjective, and when you're taking therapy, it's not about the end goal. You have the journey, and the content of the journey that really define you as a person and develop your character. So I took therapy with this organization called the Yellow Chair Collaboration, and they're really helpful because their background and history really was relatable to mine. They're an Asian-oriented group, and with that said, they were really able to talk about relatable topics with me. And throughout therapy, it was a 3-month session, and I had this transformation going through my mind space to see, what I could learn, what I could discover, or even rediscover, and it was really eye-opening in the sense of who I am as a person.
I appreciate Brandon being so open about going to therapy, where it's something that doesn't need to be a stigma to attend therapy. There doesn't have to be something wrong. It could just be a check-in, and it doesn't have to be this transformative moment every time you go, right? So I really appreciate you discussing that. And I realized I didn't introduce myself before we got started, but I am the program coordinator for Changing Tides. Changing Tides is a program of Little Tokyo Service Center, similar to how the Terasaki Budokan is a project of Little Tokyo Service Center. But on the note of where we are today, we are at the Terasaki Budokan. The Budokan is hosting this event, and it's also a community gathering space. You could look around and you could just say, hey, this is a basketball gym. But really, this is a community center. Sort of similar to the Lai Lai Ballroom and Studio, which your family owns. So when it comes to the Budokan or the studio that your family owns, what is the importance of these community gathering spaces, and what does it mean to you to be in spaces like this?
Well, these spaces, such as Terasaki Budokan, are really a location where people get to connect with each other. They get to exchange and learn about their stories, their history, their background, and even more so, it's a place where people can build relationships and make a foundation where they get the stepping stones to really elevate the community. It doesn't even have to be something about business. It could be about athleticism. It could be about sports. You meet new people with hidden talents that you could bring onto your team and compete for your cities or your communities. And it's really important because we have this area where we designate out of our daily struggles, and you come here to improve on your physical wellness and also your mental wellness in a sense where you'll be able to get out of your head for an hour a day and really just focus on what you love and enjoy here at the Terasaki Budokan.
So, going back to what you had mentioned earlier and how you were the hero in the Monterey Park event, when you disarmed the gunman, you had the safety of your community in mind. So, like standing up to a school bully, you stood up to someone who threatened the well-being of the others around you. So why do you think it's important to stand up for others, whether it be your classmates, teammates in a sporting event, or your community?
So it's really important to stand up for people who portray injustice, because if you're struggling with these bullies in your environment, you really need to stand up to them, because there's nothing that's impeding them from these actions. If you don't stand up to them, they're just gonna go through a cycle where they think it's okay to repeat these actions because there's no detriment to it. There's no nothing that's really negative in their eyes to repeat these injustices. And by standing up to them, you also give the people around you the courage and incentive to stand up against them and to really, bring community together and sort of elevate the standards of your environment.
So, as I mentioned earlier, I'm the program coordinator for Changing Tides, and at Changing Tides, we're dedicated to breaking down the barriers and open up the conversation around mental health within the AAPI community and beyond. So, Brandon, what you mentioned earlier about therapy and how that was really helpful and working with the Yellow Chair Collective, I've seen in your interviews that you've discussed the upbringing that you had and how in your upbringing you had to hide your emotions, not act on your emotions. But can you talk about, in your mental health journey, the barriers that you would face and how you approach wellness now compared to during your upbringing?
Yeah, so growing up in the U.S., we were a migrant family, and my family had a language barrier with everyone, and it was something where we would only be able to relate to another Asian household with the same background. So we were really not outspoken, and we were, kept ourselves trying to adapt to our new situation. And with that said, I was just trying to keep to myself so that my parents' struggles didn't, grow any bigger. And throughout my life here in the U.S., going through education, learning about certain topics, I think that mental health and emotional vulnerability really is important. You need to have this emotional vulnerability where you'll be able to communicate your emotions well to others so they know what type of mind state you are in and how they can help. But with that said, emotional vulnerability, you also need to have emotional control with that. You can't just go around yelling at people, venting your anger, venting your thoughts to others. There's a certain point where you need emotional control to really translate to another person how you're feeling, or else it'll just come out as, really irrational and really affects poorly on the community.
So something that in regard to that, about controlling your emotions and having, on the flip side, there's this side of natural reactions that you have in that moment to protect people from that gunman. So to prioritize your community's well-being, that's something that you had to do, to have this natural reaction kind of on the flip side, right? So with it being tough to open up about your own well-being, it makes me kind of think of you can't pour from an empty cup. So can you talk about why it's important to take care of yourself and your own mental health in order to care for others?
Yeah, so it's important to not pour from an empty cup because when you're telling somebody to suggest some kind of program for them, you basically have to lead by example. You have to tell them how you got into that program, how you got into that space, and you have to tell them, look at me, I'm okay because of this program, so you can try it out and see if you can be okay too. And it's not about just being by example. You have to know what you're talking about. You have to experience what going through mental health resources is like, so that you can recommend these resources to others. Otherwise, just saying words out of your mouth, there's an empty meaning to it.
So you've very quickly been thrust into the spotlight since this act of bravery in Monterey Park. So how do you feel when you're called a hero? Which you are 100% a hero, but how does that feel for you to be called that?
So being called a hero at first was pretty awkward. I don't know if anybody else would be called a hero in my situation, but I think that being a hero is about what you make of it. Really, I think that there's a certain standard to uphold now for me, where I can have the ability to help my community, and with that said, I want to do the best for it. So that's why I'm out here today, talking about my mental health journey and what I went through.
Coming towards the end of this more serious part of the interview, I have some quick fire questions just to ask you for fun. But this event, it's being held by the LA Kings and the LA Galaxy. I think there's some parallels between your story and the core tenets of a sports team. Themes like selflessness for the success of a group or the importance of mental health. Is there a message that you'd like the young listeners here to take away from today?
Well, for the younger audience here, I just want to say, if you train your mind enough, the body will follow. So it's not just about training the physical. You also need to train your mental.
Thank you. That was such a great, quick response to such a rounded way you could have approached that. Before I get to some of these quick fire questions, is there anything else you'd like to say?
As of now, no. I think we want to wrap this up to see the kids play around and have fun at our event later on this day.
Okay, so I'll make these quick because I know all the kids here want to get to this events that our lovely hosts are putting on for us. So first, is there a sport that you didn't play growing up that you wish you could conquer, similar to a professional on the LA Kings and LA Galaxy?
Oh, definitely soccer. I think that soccer is an activity that goes unrecognized. There's this certain sense to it where you actually need to be there to experience what soccer really encompasses. The crowd, the sporting event, the energy around it. It's just so exhilarating. And throughout my life through high school, I see my friends playing soccer and other sporting events that I didn't really participate in. But the number one, I think that my friends really had a good time going through with soccer.
If there were 5 people from any time in history that you could go to dinner with, who would they be?
Oh gosh, on the spot. Stephen Hawking, Steve Jobs. Michael Jordan. At top of my head, it's hard to think of now, actually, but Abraham Lincoln. And let's see. I have no other clue. I guess Nikola Tesla.
Well, Brandon, I want to thank you so much for your time, and for the audience, thank you for being such a great audience. Could we give Brandon a hand? Are we good on your guys' end, time-wise? Okay, cool. So I think that about wraps it up for Brandon and I. If you want to learn more about Changing Tides, we have a table out in the hallway right by the entrance. If you want to learn more, we have some handouts and some stickers and such. But otherwise, enjoy the rest of the events that are being put on by the LA Kings and the LA Galaxy. And thank you so much for your time, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the interview that I got to do with Brandon and to hear his story. And if you're watching on YouTube, you got to see the very cool setup that the Kings and the Galaxy set up for us. And, it was really cool to be in that space made for youth to hear about mental health, and starting at such a young age where I didn't start talking about mental health until my senior year of high school. And I think it was a little bit stigmatized still when I was growing up, but it's so much more common for young adults to talk about mental health now. So hopefully it would just open the doors for the middle schoolers and the young high schoolers that were there to have these healthy discussions. But, this was a shorter interview, so I thought I'd ramble on a little bit about some questions that I got on my own mental health in this last few episodes, as I have discussed that I am newer to being consistent with therapy. And I wanted to just share a little bit about that because, as I do work for Changing Tides, and I may not be a mental health professional, but I for some reason put a pressure on myself to, even though we preach therapy for all of our supporters, for some reason, because I worked for Changing Tides, I felt like I needed to be above needing therapy, which is obviously an unhealthy mindset. And there's really no rhyme or reason to that, but I think it's just the pressure that I put on myself. At least that's what my therapist has told me is the reason why I have some of the tendencies that I do. So I did try therapy my senior year of high school when I started having these more serious clinical depression episodes. And it wasn't the best fit. I really disliked therapy after that. And I think it was largely, the main thing I think was I wasn't ready for it. But another aspect of it, though, was the therapist fit. And I'm sure, this is what we always talk about in Changing Tides is at the time, before Changing Tides existed, I think I just told my parents about it. My parents looked up the best therapists in the area, and I picked one off the list. And, I didn't really do an intake call with them. I just went to my first session and we kind of started, and it just wasn't a good fit. So I had a pretty bad experience with therapy back then, and I just haven't gone back since, despite knowing how great of a tool it can be for people. So I did start seeing a therapist recently who is AAPI, and she has been so helpful to me. I see it so clearly where it benefits me. So I'm wondering if she would be interested in being a guest on the podcast, or if maybe that's a violation of HIPAA or anything like that. But maybe I'll float the question to her to see if she'd be interested. But yeah, I just wanted to share that. And, now that May has ended, which was AAPI Heritage Month and Mental Health Awareness Month, just kind of reflect on the opportunities that came toward Changing Tides during that time. We participated in, I want to say, 3 to 4 panels just to come and discuss mental health and our experiences for different groups or organizations that wanted to create a safe space to discuss mental health for their organization or for their employees. So it was really cool to have Changing Tides be reached out to and offered this opportunity to discuss mental health within their groups. And we were invited to a lot of, outreach opportunities to have an informative table in Sawtell, in South Pasadena, in Redondo Beach. We had a lot of opportunities to just sit down, hand out some of our informative pamphlets and info cards, and talk with the communities that we were invited to. And it was really a whirlwind of a month, and I was pretty stressed out at times, but upon reflection, as I'm sitting down and recording this, I am just really grateful. And I think our whole team at LTSC and Changing Tides are grateful for the fact that we were invited to these spaces to just talk and discuss mental health, and that people trust us to be the folks that are discussing mental health in these spaces. So, it was a great opportunity, and We look forward to more of these opportunities coming up. So, yeah, it was a busy month, but here we are. We made it through to the other side. And I hope some of the listeners here are some of the people that we got to meet at these events. So if you are one of those folks, thank you. But also if you're a longtime listener or just a new listener in general that wanders upon this podcast, we thank you for your support. So I think I've rambled on long enough. I just wanted to add some time to this podcast, and also, honestly, for me, just reflect and speak out loud some of the feelings I've felt in the last few weeks. And where better than the Changing Tides podcast? So that's pretty much it for this episode. And I think I already thanked Brandon for being on the podcast. But if I didn't, then thank you, Brandon, for being on the podcast and for allowing me to interview you at the Terasaki Budokan in front of such a great audience. Before I wrap up, though, that was such a great opportunity to speak to someone like Brandon and be invited to an event by the LA Kings and the LA Galaxy. I took this job just being passionate about mental health, and it's really cool to see these groups and these teams, these organizations, these people that I get to interact with through this job. So it's been really cool. So I just wanted to add that before I wrap up, but mostly thank you to Brandon, the LA Kings, and the LA Galaxy for inviting me in. So if you enjoyed this episode, we do release episodes every other Tuesday. So you could give us a rating or review on your favorite podcast platform, and don't forget to subscribe or follow. If you would like to support our podcast and help us grow, you can do so with a donation to the link at the bottom of the episode description. To hear more about Changing Tides, follow us on Instagram at LTSC_Changing Tides, or check out our website, thechangingtides.org. Let's continue to change the tides on mental health.
Yeah.